What's up, everybody? So I said in the last video that I was thinking about messing around with like a Xerox style blue black Murktide shadow deck, and this is kind of like my first iteration. Where yesterday we were running like Tarmogoyfs. I basically just swapped them out uh for Opt in this case. Um, Kept the three Murktide instead of the four. I just figured like with eight one drop cantrips plus the four Street Wraith that I wouldn't really have a problem finding a Murktide. And then kept like the three Drown in the Lock instead of the four for kind of the same reason. Ultimately, I don't have a lot of specific reason for some of the numbers. I just wanted to test like the 8 1 mana cantrips and see how often I was seeing what I needed. People have already kind of asked, like, what about Bobble, Mishra's Bobble? I'd like Mishra's Bobble if we were on Gurmag Angler or Tombstalker, like something that just cared about having cards in the graveyard, period. But I think we're really trying to aggressively enable like a big Murktide. We want to dodge Unholy Heat. We don't care about just having great cards in the graveyard. We care about having specific card types in the graveyard. And I think that's very, very important as a distinction. Also thought about Thought Scour, but the ability off of like Opt to scry and then draw helps to find those specific things we're looking for. And essentially, we're starting off the game looking for a threat. As soon as we have a threat, we are looking for counter magic, and that's it. So, again, it's not a matter of like filling the graveyard just randomly. It's a matter of we want to improve our chances of finding specific things at specific points in the game. So Bobble and Thought Scour are both going to kind of be like, here's a random card off the top. That's your redraw. Where Consider and Opt are both going to be, hey, this card off the top isn't exactly what we're looking for. Let's look one card farther. So keep that in mind as we can trip our way through this league. The sideboard, pretty much same sideboard I've been kind of running. A couple Flusterstorm, the fourth Stubborn Denial, Dress Down, a second Dress Down, Hercule's Recall, a couple Spreading Seas, Path of Peril. Path of Peril has really been like overperforming for me, so interested in that one. Two Turok, a Shieldred's Edict, a Fatal Push, Chalice of the Void, EE, and Unlicensed Hearse. In the main deck, like I mentioned, the four Consider, four Opt, four Street Wraith is kind of our cantrip package. Three Stubborn Denial, four Shadow, three Push, four Thoughtseize, four Counterspell, three Drown in the Lock, a Dress Down, two Dismember, two Archmage's Charm, three Murktide Regents. Since I went up with like the four Opt in addition to the four Consider, the four Wraith, I dropped down to 19 lands. Maybe there's an argument for going even farther down to 18, but I figure this is just like first run through. Might as well see what happens. So on to match number one, slowly but surely. All right. So lose the die roll. Unfortunately, we're up against a Karuga deck. So expecting something like the four color Omnath pile. But then our opponent leads on a Hall of the Storm Giants. And I know that Omnath deck doesn't play Hall, and especially not Hall into Mika Koro. So no idea what's going on, but Thoughtseize sees like a couple Narset, uh, Chandra Torch of Defiance, Fires of Invention, Days Undoing. So some sort of just like Chandra Days Undoing lock deck. Let's get some light in here while I'm commentating. Bam. Some sort of Chandra Days Undoing lock deck. Any sort of combo deck like this theoretically should be a good matchup for us. They do not have a third land, so we're kind of just hoping that they whiff on their third land for one turn. So, of course, that doesn't work out. Even worse, they find a red source. So we're just gonna try to find a little bit of interaction. We do find a Thought Seed, so we can take away this day's undoing, get shadow down, hold up stubborn denial to fight over something on their turn. We're about to see a punt by me. I draw an opt. I meant to attack the Narset first and then opt. And for some reason, I just like opted first and was like, oh, counterspell. Cool. That's really good. Wait, why didn't I draw it? Oh, I forgot to attack. So punt on my part. Um, because we punted, don't compound mistakes. If I pass the turn and my opponent plays Chandra, they can down tick on my shadow and kill it off. So I dismember my own shadow on my turn so that if I pass and they play Chandra, they can't kill it. If they fires of invention and then play some follow up to that, then so be it. So they do fires of invention, savor the moment. Luckily, like I said, this Chandra can't actually kill my shadow because I dismembered it. So now we're just banking on a couple pieces of counter magic and a fatal push. Them tapping mana was really weird because like Fires of Invention's here. So you think, oh, they don't have to tap mana. So I was kind of wondering like what was going on with this play. And then they ended up cycling a Shark Typhoon. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like I'm gonna fatal push the heck out of this token, but it's cool. Uh, so counter Dead Gone, keep my shadow on board, fatal push the shark token, and we get away with the win. Luckily, any deck that relies around a bunch of like 3, 4, 5 mana sorcery speed cards is going to be a pretty reasonable matchup for our deck. So happy to see this kind of a matchup in round one. So right off the bat with this game two, we get to see the cantrip suite in action. Not too worried about our life total. Just like with Watery Grave here, we just want to find land drops. Opponent's gonna fire and ice, but because we have all these cantrips, we get to just get use out of our mana anyway. And now I think we're going to be looking to get down a threat. Shadow looks a lot better than Murktide because we get to hold up double Stubborn Denial. So when they go for this mystical dispute on my shadow, I get to soft stub that, pass a turn, have another soft stub, and then hopefully just never tap off of counter magic again. I could let the fires of invention resolve and then counter the next thing. The issue with that play is if they have two things next turn and I don't find a land, then I can't hold up double counter spell. So instead, I'd rather just counter the fires and figure out the next thing after that. Opponent goes for fire and ice on the shadow. Decide to just let it resolve so that I can hold up counter magic through their turn instead, which kind of pays off because I would have loved to counter a Jace, and luckily I get to. Fortunately, we don't find another land, so I'm in a bit of an awkward position where if I pass or if I attack and they hit a land, they can just kill me with Hall of the Storm Giants on the way back. So I've got to be kind of passive. I wanted to find a land there, but since I didn't, maybe I should have just passed so they couldn't like ice down one of my two untapped lands if they had an ice. But Time Warp's gonna eat a counter spell. Sees Days Undoing and Savor the Moment. We'll take the Savor the Moment and find enough damage to kill with a shadow. So nice. Um So this is actually match number 3. I do want to point out that this video is going to be a little bit shorter because match number 2, my opponent just timed out, just disconnected, timed out. So there's not really anything to report on that one. So we got to 4-match league instead of 3 or instead of 5. Anyway, here's Shadow. Hallowed Fountain Thraben Inspector. So expecting some sort of like a blink deck, like an ephemerate deck. I could fire out the second Shadow, but because I see like the Thraben Inspector and I'm expecting ephemerate, I'm assuming they've got Solitude as well. So if they Solitude this single Shadow, then that's fine. But if I play out double Shadow and they Solitude both of them, that's terrible for me. So instead, I get to fire off one of my cantrips, find another land, and now I've got like Shadow plus a counter spell. Again, fighting over that Ranger Captain, because if they do like invoke a Solitude after that, at least they can't ephemerate it, and I would get to untap with double counter spell. So, not the worst situation in the world. Um, so here I go for Archmage's Charm to steal the Thraben Inspector. It's kind of an awkward spot because I've seen March of Otherworldly Light. So if I go to like steal the Thraben Inspector and they march my Shadow, then my clock gets cut down significantly. But if they have like Ephemerate or something, then I can untap and kill the Thraben Inspector anyway, and it's fine. So luckily, it is Ephemerate instead of March or a Solitude. So I do get to just like untap, kill the Thraben Inspector, attack in for lethal. Nice. I forgot to mention match number 1 against like the Narset deck. My sideboarding is just like the same as it would be against any sort of combo deck. Bring out all the removal, bring in anything that says like counter spell. Against a deck like this, I saw Emeria game 1, so I did bring in unlicensed hearse, but the most of the sideboarding other than that was just bringing shaving on like Thoughtseize and Street Wraith, boarding in dress downs or the extra dress down, boarding in the unlicensed hearse to help fight over Emeria, and if they're running some sort of a proclamation like martyr proc package. Certainly don't want to fairy resolving, especially with this next turn being able to thought seize. Okay, so this is one of the really cool things about running Murktide. I thought seize and see Runed Halo, Skyclave Apparition, Temporary Lockdown, Ranger Captain. So I know Skyclave and Temporary Lockdown cannot interact with Murktide. So 2 of the cards in their hand are already dead. So all I got to worry about is Runed Halo naming Murktide and Ranger Captain finding something that can shut down Murktide, which I don't know what that would be for 1 mana, but regardless, I've got 2 pieces of counter magic for 2 current ways of potentially answering a Murktide. Realistically, 1, because like Ranger Captain, I don't think has a lot of ways to deal with it. But I do get to just like Thoughtseize again, see a Sanctifier on Vec that they've picked up. Again, that doesn't deal with Murktide. So at the end of the day, it's like, all right, Ruined Halo was your only answer to this Murktide. That's gone now. Kill off the Ranger Captain to cut back on the clock. Opponent chips in for a couple points and gets a Sanctifier down. Don't care about the Sanctifier. And again, I think this is one of those times that I have to point out, like, if it's not killing you, like if it's not killing me faster than I'm killing them, it's not getting rid of my clock, don't care about it. it doesn't matter. There's no reason to like fire off a counter spell on the Sanctifier because the Sanctifier is not killing me faster than the Murktide's killing them. Um, the worst thing I could do is like fire off a counter spell on the Sanctifier and then like drown in the lock one of these creatures, and my opponent just evokes a Solitude, like top deck a Solitude. I do not want to put myself in that position. So I can let the Sanctifier resolve. They go to whatever thing this field or whatever guy does. It's like if you have three creatures with different powers or something, he transforms and becomes a 4/4 or something. Either way, it would kill me, so I got to drown in the lock to kill it. But I just get to hold up counterspell after this. So smooth path to victory there. Round number 4 or 3 of recording, 4 of the actual league. Opponent reveals a Kahira, so either elementals or like blue white control. Uh, Misty doesn't really give anything away, but Flooded Strand means it's more likely blue white control, especially getting like a Rogran Triome instead of like a Teamer Triome. But I mentioned it a few times before on stream, but typically a Kahira deck that has more green fetches, so like Windswept Heaths and maybe Wooded Foothills and stuff, is more likely to be elementals. If it's more blue based fetches, it's more likely to be blue white control. So if you see a Kahira deck and they lead on like a Flooded Strand, more likely blue white control. Obviously, Misty Rainforest could go either way, but so we've had a lot of considers and ops on our side. We've got a pretty stacked hand of counter spells. Just need to find a way to get our shadow online. Do have to like fight over a chalice here. Luckily, they have Archmage's Charm instead of another counter spell. But we're just trying to find a time to Archmage's Charm, draw some cards, kind of pull ahead that way. Which we are able to get down shadow, hold up double counter spell. Unfortunately, our double counter spell is met with double 1 mana removal plus counter spell. So sometimes you have 2 answers to 3 questions. Could have played out Street Wraith as a threat there, but I think I'd rather just like try to find a Murktide or another shadow. So our opponent's at 2 cards. We're at 4 counter spells, so odds are fairly good if we find a threat. There we go. So flashback, the Memory Deluge. Still have double counter spell up. There's the third pending. Plus a Solitude. Okay. So we get to answer those. We know one of their unknown cards is a Kahira, which we don't really care about. We also just have Otawara that can answer it. Fetch and shock down to 10 so that we know this shadow's a 2-turn clock. Verdict, but we can Otawara to bounce our own shadow. Chalice of the Void here. Got to counterspell that so we can resolve our shadow, but we know their last card is Kahira. Double shadow. Like, we all know where this is going. Everybody who's watching this video at home is like, well, you play double shadow to play around them playing Kahira, and you give them 1 turn to top deck a Solitude or a a verdict. Like you dodge the solitude. Not. So they did to ferry into a solitude. Now we have Murktide, and again, one turn to find an answer to the Murktide. Archmage's Charm into second to fairy. Okay. Thoughtseize, they top deck Dress Down. So a way to stop me from having lethal shadow plus Murktide. I should have just played the shadow and passed here. I don't think there was any benefit to playing out the Murktide here when it's not lethal. And of course, that means I get punished by my opponent top decking another Solitude. So this was just like hell series for me of opponent just like not missing a draw step. But there were 2 or 3 times there that I could have mitigated the damage. Like, it's tough to say a play is outright right or wrong because all of these situations were, hey, you've got no cards in hand, one turn to draw a specific kind of answer. So, like, if I play out Double Shadow, you have one turn to top deck a Supreme Verdict, which you've already uh, used one, a Solitude, which you've already used one, a Teferi into something, or I guess like Prismatic Ending makes a chump block. But if you top deck a land, you die, a chalice, you die, any sort of counter spell, you die. So pretty like good number of whiffs there. Uh, and it was just double shadow. They top deck the Teferi into Solitude. Play out the Murktide. They top deck Teferi into Dress Down when I thought seized to replay the Murktide. So the series of like really hot draws out of them. And I don't hate my decision to force them to have a like very specific set of answers in a very small window. But if I had played the conservative route of like I think they are going to have it, then I probably could have given myself a little bit better chance to win. But ultimately, I think with the odds, my play was like over 50% to win. It's just if they do have it, how do I express that sentiment? Like, I think my play was over 50% to win. But if they do have the thing, then instead of me putting myself in a position to be like 50% to win again, I put myself in a position to be like 25% to win. Uh, I think is the best way that I can kind of describe that scenario. Obviously, those percentages aren't exact by any stretch of the imagination, but I think you get the idea. Like, I could have played the conservative route to mitigate the downside and didn't. Sideboarding against blue white control, bringing in like Flusterstorm Stub, boarding out the fatal pushes, dismembers. Also bring in engineered explosives against blue white control and Turok EE mostly to help interact with like Chalice of the Void. Because post board they could be going up to like 3 or 4 copies of it. And so just like having that extra answer. Whole miss a draw go. Neither Neither side doing anything particularly interesting. We're missing land drops. They're missing land drops. And start getting some cards in the yard to maybe get a Murktide down plus counter magic. But ultimately, like, I'm not playing out Murktide until I have the ability to back it up with counterspell because I need to be able to fight over a solitude. Dovin's Veto, you got it. Thoughtseize is pretty good top deck. Um, this is probably a situation where obviously if I had another black source, I could Turok plus Thoughtseize, and that would be pretty solid. But since I only had one black source there, I had to decide between just playing out Turok and Thought Seizing. And I think the Thought Seize is okay, but I don't hate the idea of just playing out Turok there. Obviously, it would have gotten punished with my opponent having Jace the Mind Sculptor, but at the same time, I'd have something to do. I did not expect my opponent to just let my Flusterstorm resolve. Like, I'm just trying to get cards out of their hand and maybe bait this counter spell so that I can kick Turok. Like, we'll go for hard cast a Street Wraith again just to try to bait the counter spell, which we do. So if my opponent draws dead this turn, I'm hoping to kick Turok next turn. They don't do anything. Fingers crossed they didn't top deck a counter spell. Yep, Archmage's Charm. There goes that plan. So now their last card is another Prismatic Ending. So if I can find like a Murktide here, another Shadow, something like that, I could be in solid shape. Consider is great. I feel like I have to take a Drown in the Loch, like just something to help me fight over anything that can come down. And luckily, my opponent top deck's a big Teferi. So I know their last card is still Prismatic Ending. I'm just looking for threats at this point of some variety. Street Wraith, they immediately top deck the Solitude. Ugh. All right. Shadow or Murktide? Nope. Are feeling a little flooded. This is all of our fetchables here. I also thought it was really funny that, like, this game's still going on and it's about to be turn 20 against blue white control. And we're still like very, very live here. We just found a shadow. It's kind of that situation where if we top deck a second threat, then we're very much in it. Keep Shieldred's Edict just so I can make them sack the Murktide. Let them chip in for a point. Ultimately, like, I need another threat to win this game anyway, so I'm not too terribly concerned about like a point or two of chip damage. So here's a Wraith. Fairy eats a counter spell. Not the most exciting draw in the world. So they take the hit, make a token. So now if they go for like a attack here, then a top deck drown in the lock can kill them. A top deck threat can stall the game. Unfortunately, we just kind of keep finding lands here in the 11th hour. And that's not going to be enough to get us there. I do think it's interesting in games like this where you've gone on such a long time. You build your deck to include all these extra like cantrips and stuff, and there's still just a reasonable chance you don't see them. All right, so Thoughtseize, we're up against Yawgmoth. Take the Grist because it's a card we like can't deal with in the slightest. Luckily, we do have Drown in the Locks for Strangleroot Geist, and then maybe one of the follow ups. If we can dismember something, we can get down a quick Shadow. So, Young Wolf, we've got Drown in the Lock for like a Court of Calling for one, or a Grist. Stubborn Owl is fantastic. So now we have an answer to this chord. We can be kind of aggressive with our attack. The likelihood of them just going block chord is pretty high. And I can tell you where I screwed up this game. Right here, I should have just played out the Street Wraith. They're courting for one. I should have said I don't care about that. Like you can go get a mana dork or another young wolf or something. I'm just gonna play out the Street Wraith. And they ended up getting or finding another grist, and I just keep finding more wraiths. I should have had another threat down here, but I didn't, and they were able to just Eldritch Evolution for a Geist, sack the Geistergrist to kill my blocker, and attack through. Sideboard, boarding out like stubs, shaving on Thoughtseize and Drown in the Lock causes like endurance and Veil of Summer. Bringing in Dress Downs, bringing in Unlicensed Hearse. Here we got a pretty proactive hand. We've got threats. I'm not afraid of my opponent doing anything to kill my shadows, my 1/1 shadows. So we'll just get down the clock and start like firing off attacks. Like, hey, I've got counter spells and fatal pushes, and the next two things you cast aren't going to resolve. We'll fatal push the Strangleroot Geist here because we're forcing a chump block. So we get to kill off the Geist, put them for 6, make both of our shadows lethal threats, and we've got a counter spell. So, yeah. I think opponent's not coming away with that game. So this is for the 4/1. Opening hand had a bunch of interaction, but no threat. Let's talk about that opening hand real quick. That 7-card hand. So I think this is very much like a trap hand because it looks good with a lot of interaction for a creature heavy deck, a lot of answers like Yawgmoth, but we can't answer a grist with this hand, and we don't have any sort of pressure on our side. So I think what likely happens is if they play an undying creature in the first couple turns, or like a wall of roots that kind of pressures our mana, then we end up just having to spend a bunch of life on dismembers and stuff, and if they resolve a grist on turn 3, we just kind of like roll over and die. So we mulligan instead, keep a hand with Thoughtseize and Murktide. So if our opponent has like not too fast of a clock, we can Thoughtseize, potentially take something scary like a grist, and hopefully get down a pretty quick Murktide, or in this case, a turn 2 Shadow. So kind of like I was mentioning earlier, now we can get actual pressure going. We'll just hold up Counterspell this turn in case our opponent goes for like Yawgmoth. Instead to go for Endurance. And they play the second Beseiju. I'm guessing this means they have something to hold up. I don't know what it would be, but regardless, we're just going to play out Murktide. And turns out they did have something to hold up. They just waited too long to play it. So we got down the Murktide. We get to hold up Counterspell to answer this Yawgmoth. So we know their last card in hand is a Tamiyo's Safekeeping, which I had to read like 4 times to find out that it gives Indestructible. Pretty cool, but at the end of the day, like, we're going to get in and attack, force the Safekeeping because they have to double block. So there's no reason they're not going to Safekeeping the Endurance. Probably under the assumption that their out is top decking a Strangleroot Geist and attacking back for lethal. But lucky for us, we just have another Murktide. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on our opponent to have something pretty good here. And they don't. So nice. All right. So 4-1 with an asterisk for the Xerox deck. Asterisk because, again, in round number 2, our opponent timed out. So a little bit of incomplete data there. Some things that I'm initially concerned about or wondering about is like, A, do I think it's worth going down to 18 lands with the 12 1 or less mana cantrips and going up to the 4th Murktide Regent? Because obviously there were several times where we just like needed a threat, couldn't find a threat, which is crazy to see or say with all the draw effects, but it happens. Could also mean going down to like 4 consider, 2 opt, and maybe just going like 4th drown, 4th Murktide, improve the consistency a little bit. Sideboard I think was reasonable. I've also thought about going down to 2 islands instead of 3. So the 3 islands are mostly so you can cast like Archmage's Charm through Blood Moon, as well as if your opponent is or does get a Blood Moon down quickly, you have a little bit better chance of drawing into the islands. But if we're going up on Stubborn Denials like I have been, then having the ability to play through a Blood Moon is a little less necessary because you're just upping your ways of interacting with Blood Moon on the stack. Obviously not as good with like Magus of the Moon, but can't beat everything. Otherwise, yeah, we didn't see a lot of matches for some of our sideboard test cards. Like, we didn't see anything that Hurkyl's Recall, Path of Peril, Spreading Seas were especially good against, or Chalice of the Void. I don't even think we saw an EE matchup. Like, it's okay against Yawgmoth, but it's not great. So I always try to take a minute to go over sideboarding at the end of every league, because if there's cards in my sideboard that aren't actively getting used for an extensive period, then it kind of becomes like, hey, I need to swap this out and look at something else. But just like one league without using some of them, I don't think is enough to hit the panic button. But pretty interesting league. I did want to point out this. Let me pull up the match records. For those of you who don't know, I do keep like a pretty pretty extensive spreadsheet of like matches with different shadow variants. And Dimir has been sitting at like this 74% win rate, which is really, really, really solid. So I've been very, very happy with the way that this deck has performed. And obviously, like we've had a lot of content to put out on YouTube and whatnot because of it. Um, Usually, like I include basically every league I run through. I'll include leagues that are less than 4-1 if they're interesting. But ultimately, like if I did have a 1-4 league or something, people like never watch it, so it's not really worth uploading. But if you're interested in the actual matchup breakdowns, what the percentages are looking like, then you're more than welcome to like leave a comment down below, and I'll be happy to answer that. Otherwise, if you're enjoying the commentary and enjoying the videos, feel free to drop a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Greatly helps us improve our numbers. Because again, this is an avenue that I'm really trying to build up as best I can. Otherwise, hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch you back live later. Adios for now.